Welcome to the Goma Stake Pool channel, and thank you always for your support. We've been having issues with the Goma team, as you know, with the war in Congo. They are quite having difficulties accessing the internet. However, I'll be your host while they get ready and while connections gets available in Congo. So far, so good. The Goma Stake Pool, we've approaching the 100 minted blocks. And we've passed the 100 electors. Thank you very much for your support, and hopefully we reach that 100 blocks minted, and of course reach the 2 million delegations so that we can produce blocks on a more regular basis. Before then, I'd like to talk to you about, of course, applications of the blockchains in Africa, and especially in the case of Goma in Congo, and also in general as to why the blockchain is a solution for Africa. The beginning, the blockchain is of course a new technology both in developing countries and developed nations. However, the applications for that technology differ. In developed nations, the blockchain or crypto are mostly used for speculation, portfolio diversification, as well as of course other applications which are mostly dependent on the maturity of the existing financial systems. In terms of applications in the developing world, the blockchain is mostly used for survival, fighting the increase in inflation, as well as potentially having lower cost in terms of money exchanges. There are also billions of people who have no bank accounts, and those digital solutions, mobile money, and now the blockchain could offer solutions that are more accessible to them. Making payments cheaper is also always a key aspect of the blockchain, and in the case of Equival as well, I'll explain as to how Equival fits in lowering the cost of remittances. However, today's presentation and today's video is mostly about a contrast between how the blockchain is used in developed nations in comparison to those usage in developing nations. So as I mentioned earlier, is that the usage is very different, and the cases I will of course cover a few, and first I'll start with the financial inclusion, which is what the blockchain is meant to solve in developing nations. In developed nations, financial services are already mature. There are large banks, they're regulated, they have so many other intermediaries that facilitate transfers. In most cases, like Canada, money transfer is cheap to interact. In the US, there are also other applications that make money exchange quite easy. And also those financial markets are mature, there are traders, there are also commission-based online platforms you can use to invest. However, in Africa, first of all, digitally, the internet is not reliable in many countries, and also banks are mostly catering for the rich or for the large mining companies, especially in the case of Congo, or in companies where there are mining companies as well. And for the commoner, accessing services in the bank is a matter of taking time on the line, waiting until they welcome you if they ever, and sometimes even they may not even able to serve you for the day, even after having spent 4 to 5 hours in line. And in the case of remittances as well, you know, the remittances are costing those who send money fees. Around 10% is paid in fees, both in terms of the proper fees and what we call spread, the exchange between currencies or other fees that are not linked to the fee properly. And also the person who ends up paying those fees is of course the person receiving, because the sender has a margin they are using to send. They want to send a given amount, and whatever fee is applies lower or higher is borne by the recipient. And in this case, the recipient is always the poorest of both, and they will be the ones who would have to incur the cost. So quite a lot of cost in terms of remittances. And also the other applications, savings, for example, in developed nations, savings accounts are accessible through the same portal as your regular checking account. Saving can generate some low interest. However, you do have guarantees as to how your savings are saved, up to a certain amount in many countries, than hundreds of thousands, whereas in developing nations, accessing savings is mostly a matter of storing cash. Sometimes if you save your money in a bank, they can go off, they can go bankrupt and lose money. In my case, I think I've lost a few tens of thousands. For example, in Congo, where two banks, one first a credit union and another one, a bank actually potentially was the second largest in the country, had issues with the government, and I think they had to close. We were not able to access our funds, so it's quite challenging. And also there is the whole global access to money, as in being able to raise money. Should you be an entrepreneur, should you want to raise capital for your business in Africa or in developing nations, it's just not possible. It is feasible, however, it's challenging. First of all, there has to be the same shared interest. The investment is quite localized, so having the same interest, for example, if you are from the diaspora and you'd like to invest in your home country or in your home city specifically, you may not get somebody who has the same interest as yours. So you will not be able to get somebody who is going to put the same amount as you. You won't have as many as you want for a certain enterprise. Let's say you want to invest in creating a company which requires a capital of 10 million. 100 people could do that. However, given that you of course have to first all have the same amount at the same time, all have an interest in that location, so it's not feasible. However, with the blockchain, it's potentially feasible. Actually, that's where I think crowdfunding is a key application of the blockchain, because through smart contracts, you can have a set amount, a set goal, and should that goal not be met, then people will get refunded or people have some other fees paid to them. So crowdfunding is possible with the blockchain with minimal risk and shared interest, given that now you can broaden the scope of those who are interested, not just by people who live in your city, your friends, but mostly around the world. Even people who may not even be from that location, they can see an opportunity and invest in it, knowing that they will be able to safeguard their investments should the opportunity not go forward. So that's a good way to apply the blockchain. And also we can see that the blockchain has other applications which are in terms of the financial services, like for example registering plots, even safeguarding your own funds again through inflation. All those are financial services. And another application of the blockchain is governance and of course identity. There are many ways the blockchain can be used for governance, elections, immutability of results, public auditing of votes can be done without revealing both the voter and the person who got the vote, while still confirming that the vote has been transparent and it is accounted, there is no fraud. So that's an application of the blockchain. In terms of identity, again, the contrast will be in developed nations. IDs are taken for granted, like you are born, registered at a hospital, your city knows you're born, they will mail your parents knowing that you're born, social insurance numbers, all those identifications will be ready while you're still a child. In many countries in Africa, that's also the case. However, in rural areas of many countries in Africa and even in some cities in Africa, sometimes identification is not as straightforward. Like in Congo, there is no birth registry. It's at the level of the parish at most. A clinic may have your identification. However, the state will not be involved right away. Like you start getting your birth identification when you're already an adult looking for a passport. Like you would go and look for your birth certificate. It's a paper you basically tell them what to write on it. there's no proof that you are the one. You could change your name, you could change your age, you can change your anything, you can change on that spot. So yeah, of course once you get a passport then it becomes a bit tricky, but before then your identity is yours to define. So That's what it is, and it's also not a gain for you, given that usually identity, the trust you gain is based on how long you have been known. You accumulate a lot of social capital by being known. So if you are not known and you just came being an adult, a lot of you will be considered risky. However, it's still possible that through the blockchain, people can start establishing their credentials, establishing their identities, and get more in terms of social capital and recognition, of course, trust. And it has quite a profound impact, because your identification is what opens the door for, let's say, borrowing, for other types of steps in your life, marriage, school, even traveling. I mentioned the passport, so it's quite important to have an identification. And also the identification not only for the person, but also for the goods and services. Let's say you have a plot, it is identified through its number, the title is in your name. However, how do you confirm it? Currently in developing nations, like in Congo for example, there's quite a lot of fraud. Titles are being sold, sometimes split unknowingly to the owner, and that issue of corruption in that area has been the source of a great many conflicts. So it's really a major issue to solve in Africa, because once you have titles that are secured and reliable, then people will be able to kind of invest based on those titles. They can basically go to the bank and submit their titles as collateral and get a loan out of it. I've done it, but again, it's something which is not accessible to the commoner, because you have to have the manager of the bank kind of support you, if you will. And when it comes to voting, of course, the blockchain, there are many people who think that it's a solution. Even in developed nations, like in the US, I think they're talking about putting government information on the blockchain. Even in the developed nations, sometimes people complain of fraud, or they allude to fraud in voting. So if it's still occurring to this day in developed nation, then Africa could leapfrog that step and go straight into a verifiable and reliable method of voting. Of course, that is to say, if the current political leaders in Africa want accountability, if they want truth, that's another story. Most likely they are not doing it because that's not in their best interest. However, again, as a grassroots movement, people can ask for it, and they can continue to advocate for more transparency in voting. Another application of the blockchain is supply management. The logistics around supply management in developed nations is quite strong. There are concepts such as on-time delivery, which allow a producer of goods to have a set schedule for delivering those goods, and the seller of those goods, the retailer, will also receive those goods at credit, not even pay for them, only pay when those goods are sold. So which means they do not have to keep an inventory, they always have what is on shelves and a little bit of stock, of course. However, they are not committing to buying the whole stock, they sell and they pay back the producer. And also, of course, the whole intermodal means of transportation from the port to the airport, back to the road, and vice versa. It's quite well organized. In Africa, logistics are a big issue. First of all, in terms of proving ownership of the goods you're selling. For example, a farmer cannot, even if they were to be able to prove it, they will be able to prove it at a very small scale in their neighborhoods, in their local markets. They will know, yes, this is your good because they look like what you've been producing and that's what you've been supplying us. However, once they go beyond the geographical area of influence, of knowledge, then nobody knows that those will be their good. However, with the blockchain, again, through time, they can establish a certain reliable identification of the producer. Those goods will still be tracked as being theirs, and along the supply chain, they will always be validated as this is from this source A. Source A got the goods from the farmer A, and then farmer A is actually the producer of those goods. It's feasible. I have not yet really thought about how that can apply, because digitally or already the farmer will not have access to the internet most likely. They could have access to a phone. They will have to have some type of spatial characteristics of that produce to be distinguished. Like if you produce a tomato and there is another tomato, there could be variations in the size. I don't know. Like there has to be some kind of ways to identify you and then track you. So there has to be some kind of separation of types. However, it's feasible, and potentially, again, that can improve efficiency and allow for more fairness, safety, and opening the door to global trade for those poor farmers. The other source of application for blockchain technology in Africa is on energy and resources. In terms of energy, the developed nations, it will be the electricity, the gas, natural gas. In Africa, it's mostly solar panel and sometimes also electricity. However, electricity in Africa is mostly publicly produced, which means the state has a dam or some other means of producing electricity, and they sell to the population. There are some private dams, like in Congo there are some private dams. However, most private ownership of energy sources is in the form of solar panel. Solar panels sometimes do have excess supply, and owners or neighbors can exchange that supply depending on the day when they are using it, or should they not want to use it, the sun is always shining, so which means you can sell to your neighbor when you're away or when you are in low usage, and you will be able to generate funding. How do you secure that exchange? Is through very light mobile applications where you can sell your supply, and it can only be, of course, potentially across the fence. You cannot supply quite a lot of cell power away from your house. However, it's doable. It's one of the ways to be able to own it. Again, the blockchain is mostly about ownership, and then when you sell, the payment also is also guaranteed again through services such as smart contracts. Those small producers of electricity can generate a source of income which is potentially free, given that if they were not to generate it, it would have been wasted. The battery is full, there won't be any increments to the capacity of the battery, so selling it would be a way to generate funding that would have been otherwise lost. In terms of other applications, we have capital and investments. I have mentioned about crowdfunding, but I'll elaborate a bit more about it. In the West, we often see that investing is efficient. However, it's also quite segmented in terms of how much you can invest, where you can invest, how you can invest. Those things are quite segmented. For example, in some cases, they may ask you to have a certain net worth. You have to have a certain amount of funds in your portfolio before you can invest in one way or another. And also, sometimes the broker can have their own investment proposal available to you. Also, the time of investment can vary. You may want to sell or buy shares and the bank is closed, the service is not open, they open a certain time and they close at a certain time. However, on the blockchain, investing is working 24/7. For the case of those that have tokenized their assets, it's basically open 24/7, and also it's not geographically limited, which means that somebody in Africa could invest in the equivalent of a share and be able to access that service. However, where I think it's more applicable is when an entrepreneur in Africa wants to generate funding for their own business. Again, as I mentioned before, in Africa it's a matter of being socially connected, having friends, family members, other people who have the same interests as you, and you pull funds together, and that's most of the time it does not work, given that there is always a mismatch of time, of amounts, of emergencies. Somebody can commit an amount and then use it because of an emergency, and it happens many times. With the blockchain, we can change that. Of course, tokenizing assets is only as valid as the owner of those assets will make it to be. It's a matter of also knowing how mature the service will be for them to believe that you do own the asset. Because again, sometimes even the land itself, owning it is subjective, like even the people, the public officials can themselves cause fraud at the source of the registry. So how do you solve that? It's tricky. I do believe that you could solve that in terms of limiting a zone or a type of assets, declare them to be the same way as economic zones, a bit detached from the local system, and then from it know that the blockchain will be the set rules for ownership. Let's say in the case of a plot, a larger plot can be assigned to such system, and then within that plot, owners can basically sell based on those rules, and the public and the government and the officials will know that the deeds are actually based on the blockchain for the individual plots, whereas the larger plot is owned by one entity which is of course owned by the DAO, let's say, of the people who own those small plots within that bigger entity's location. That is possible. There is also another way of financial inclusion in terms of capital access, like the whole borrowing and lending. On the blockchain, there are already many borrowing services, many lending protocols. However, most of the time they are needing you to be over collateralized, which means you can borrow $100 after having proven that you have $140, which is really not how borrowing would work. I mean, I understand in terms of tokens versus stable coins, there's a benefit to not spend it and set it as collateral. It's possible. However, in the case of an African farmer or a poor worker in the informal sector, they will not have the cash to start with, and they will not have the assets to start with. So at most, the asset they have is illiquid, like it's a plot, it's a house, it's a car, it's a bicycle. It's even not even sometimes the same tangible goods. It could be like a signatory, somebody who accepts to be a cosigner or a group of cosigners in the case of small lending businesses. So it's kind of hard to get that service in Africa. However, as I said, I do think it's still a good application of the blockchain, given that the cost of establishing businesses in Africa is still low. For example, if you were to set a bank in Congo, it will require you like a capital of 15 million, which will be enough both for depositing the deposit at the central bank, establishing 2 branches and launching your services. That is still not doable in Congo yet. However, it's going to be, given that there has already been attempts, but again, they're using the wrong approach. And I think through the blockchain, we'll be able to achieve that. So that's one application where you can crowdfunding and create organizations that are based on the blockchain and support the blockchain. And I think a bank will be one of the first steps, given that it serves both the off-ramping and on-ramping for the blockchain. Another application of the blockchain is culture and of course arts. In Africa, we know that many are very young, like the average age could be around 15-ish, around 20. And by 2035, 1 in 4 on this planet will be an African, or at least of African origin, which means the younger population in Africa today will be the people who will be working by 2034, which means 35, which means getting them already set in terms of accessing an ecosystem where they can produce, sell their services, or even look for work is key, given that traveling today with the digital world may not be needed. Like if you want a worker, they used to outsource them. People work from home, so they might as well work from Africa while they're servicing companies in developed nations. So getting means to hire them, pay them, will be key. Remittances are already costing money, so a company may not be able to pay people across the world using the same services. They may have to have another way of paying them, and the blockchain could be one way. and that will help not only those younger populations get jobs, but also get payments. And another application in terms of arts is how art is sold today in Africa. It's open market. Cash is the key. You cannot pay sometimes by mobile money, and the art is usually in the form of small sculptures that can fit in a suitcase, something that of course can be shipped. That form of art can also be bought online through the blockchain. However, the other forms that are harder to get, for example, an open concert with in-person attendance, that is a bit tricky. However, the blockchain also can apply there because you can sell tickets at the gate with royalties and payments going to the artist and managing attendance as well. So it's a good application of the blockchain. It's one of the easy ways actually to apply it because many concert goers are able to have a phone and they can basically attend and guarantee that they have paid the ticket. Another application of the blockchain in terms of art is the whole royalty payment to the artist, because the royalties, once they've been tracked on the blockchain, they can continue to benefit the inheritance or the estate of the artist. Currently, not so much. Many of the artists, when they are no longer popular or no longer producing videos or movies or music, they end up sometimes not having another means of incomes, whereas actually their arts and their services continue to be consumed around the world. So the blockchain will be key because it can track over time and maintain a state of royalty transmission that is going to be easy to access through like mobile wallets. So those were the applications of the blockchain, and we'll be producing other videos in terms of key elements. For example, we'll be covering Equival, which is a P2P marketplace, and the DEX, decentralized exchange on Cardano, which is meant to facilitate the money exchange through offers and orders of currency and token exchange, as well other applications such as the integration of money, mobile money with the Cardano blockchain. So to summarize, is that the blockchain in developed nations most of the time is used for profits, diversifying your portfolio, speculation, and some other applications that involve a high amount of collateral. Whereas in Africa, the blockchain is about mostly practical applications like being able to get access to your income when the banks have closed or if they've gone under, and also fighting inflation. Sometimes many, like in Nigeria, users are using the blockchain as a means to hedge against inflation, and inflation is happening in many countries in Africa. So it's one of the most known applications. However, I do think that it can grow, and once it reaches the place where crowdfunding is happening, then the whole neoliberal concept of capital being flowing where it's scarce will apply. I still think it applies. However, because of social limitations, again, even in developed nations, you cannot invest however you want or whenever you want. So that's why also the capital which is present in developed nations cannot flow freely to emerging markets. It's controlled, it's limited, and there is social reasons for that. The blockchain, I think, can overcome that, because as I've seen, the blockchain is the only place I've seen people being able to interact with no consideration of geographical limitations, restrictions. Like in my case, I've worked with people from India, Iran, the Philippines, Vietnam. I've never been to those countries, but we work with them on a daily basis, and some I even call them by their nicknames. Like hopefully I'll meet them one day, but already from the blockchain you can see that you have many people who work together without actually having to think as to where they're coming from. So that's one of the key applications, and one that is passed, then crowdfunding will also be able to open that door for capital to flow freely and promote the places where it's needed the most. So it's happening in Africa, and it's going to continue. Equival is aiming to launch this year, and we'll be keeping you posted to what we are up to. Please subscribe, and we'll be giving you examples of practical application in Africa, and myself as well. I'll be available to support the Goma Tech Pool and continue to make these videos of information. As well, I also give out a little bit of information about another application we are trying to develop. It's also an African-led solution. It's potentially based on the Cosmos SDK. However, it offers us the ability to make applications which are really focused on the African context, are more achievable. For example, the larger blockchains are quite inaccessible for Africa, both in terms of acquisition of tokens and even usage, not even the ability to mint, because of course it's quite intensive. Bitcoin, forget it, even developed nations, individuals cannot mint it. It's in the realm of larger companies. However, even the smaller, kind of small altcoins, even themselves are becoming quite hard to participate into. So we are launching Safra Chain, which is a chain which is going to be based on the context of the African technological levels and also accessibility. However, that will be coming in a future video. Meanwhile, I wish you all a good day, and keep following us and keep supporting the Goma Tech Pool. Thank you very much.